Oh, sorry. Is there swearing on this?
You can if you want. I'm not going to try to censor you because I know sometimes like it just comes out. So like it's not a big deal to me.
All right, cool.
All right. And so I'll just start the intro. Welcome back, everybody, to the Comic Books Matter podcast. I'm your host, Jesse, and we're here to talk about comics that impacted us. And for the first time in the podcast history, we have a guest, a very special guest. You might know him as the co-creator of Sex Criminals or The White Trees at Image, the writer at Jughead at Archie, or his work at Marvel on Howard the Duck, Star-Lord, Peter Parker, The Spectacular Spider-Man, Marvel 2-in-1, Invader, Spider-Man: A Life Story, and currently Daredevil and X-Men Fantastic Four. But you might also know him as the guy who gets into many battles of wits with one Ryan Stigman, Chip Zdarsky.
Well, first of all, it's not really a battle of wits if one of the participants is witless.
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly the wits on your side.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's you talking to kind of a baby, but like a baby that can
I know.
venom.
Yeah, like sometimes I feel bad about it, like I'm belittling a child. But sometimes the child gets a bit too big for their britches. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and sometimes you just gotta put the child in its place. Like, here's your bottle and here's your pen.
You get
make
it,
something.
Jesse.
Make something with
you.
Kate's.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Chip, again, thank you for being here. Thank you for spending some time with me talking about comic books.
Oh, no, thanks for having me. And thanks for donating to the CLLDF.
Yeah, of course. I mean, like with anything with this, it's kind of hard because like I see my local comic book store shut down right now and they're trying to figure out ways to raise money on their end. And I just, I can't buy new comics. So I have all extra money now to help comic book stores anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So as always, we win this show, we bring comics to talk about how they impacted us, changed our lives, what we learned from them in a lot of ways. Like I talked about Calvin and Hobbes and how it kind of taught me how to be empathetic with people.
Okay. Yeah.
And how it taught me not to be so cynical as an adult, because even the adults in Calvin and Hobbes aren't very cynical. They're just kind of like living the world with their son.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Chip, what would you bring for us today?
Well, nothing as lofty as that. These comics didn't teach me anything.
That's fine though. They're important to you, and I want to know why they're important. That's all that really matters.
Well, okay. Well, actually, I physically have the copy here in front of me of Marvel Secret Wars, Marvel Superhero Secret Wars, issue number 7 in a 12-issue limited series. And this is like a comic that came out in 1984, and it's the first comic that I recall buying. Like before this point, I vaguely recall some Spider-Man comics in the house that I enjoyed, and like some big treasury editions of Superman stuff. But this is the comic where I remember distinctly being in like a drugstore and seeing it. And the cover was so striking, and there were so many superheroes like on the cover. I was just like, what is happening? So I was probably like 7, 8, maybe.
And before this, like, how were you introduced to superheroes? Like, were they just cartoons and then you found comics, or was it the comics first?
It's so hard to tell. Like I was dressing as Spider-Man when I was like 5, like for Halloween, and there's photos of me with my birthday cake, which was a Spider-Man themed cake. My mother, God bless her, tried to make red icing, and it's a pink Spider-Man, and it's adorable. And,
I mean, Spider-Man can be for anybody. Pink, purple, any color Spider-Man costume.
Exactly. It's like Green Lantern. There's Red Lantern. There's Pink Lantern.
That's what we need. We need Jeff Johns to give us the Spider-Man spectrum.
Exactly. The spider spectrum. So I always recall it just being there. And the 1960s cartoon in reruns, I should state in reruns because I'm not that old, was huge for me when I was a kid. Like I loved that show so much. And even the live action Spider-Man show for its brief appearance.
Yeah.
That, the Hulk, Wonder Woman, like all those, the live action shows really cemented it for me, I think. But this issue is the one that fully brought me into Marvel Comics and comics in general.
What I love about those old cartoons, because like even though I'm pretty sure I'm younger and to you, when I was growing up, that's what my parents played for me too, was the old '60s cartoons. And when people kind of get stuck up about cartoons now and kind of like what they are and what they look like, and the cartoons are there to like please kids, and kids usually don't care what they look like as long as something big happens, some kind of fighting happens. So,
yeah. I mean, you hit a certain age where you start to discern quality of animation, I think.
yeah.
Because when I was a kid too, in Canada, there was a company that imported Japanese cartoons and redubbed them here. And so around that time, I started to realize, oh, some cartoons look better than others.
Yeah.
Like this was clearly a quality versus the basic animation of the Spider-Man TV show. Which, you know, when you're 5, you don't recognize that they're repeating animation throughout the whole thing. You're just like, yay, Spider-Man swinging.
And like, and usually there's like 1 or 2 jokes that you get, so you laugh, and you're like, oh, okay, this is fun. This like there's nothing. You have no negative stigmas in your brain to make you feel like this isn't fun.
Yeah, exactly.
And I kind of wish, like with comic books and stuff, I could go back there. So I'm like, everything's fun. Nothing's bad about this stuff.
Yeah, no, like sometimes we hold on to that idea so hard as adults that, you know, we eventually transform the comics into adult comics, right?
Yeah.
Which, you know, there's a lot of debate over driving kids away from the industry, and you know that is part of it. Like all of us that grew up with the comics are so fixated on them, and it just reminds us of our childhood. We're always trying to reach for that feeling again through creating the books, but you never quite get there. And so what you do is like, you're like, well, what do I want to see now in the comics? And so you end up with comics with maybe a bit more unsavory or adult themes, and so it's entertaining for a portion of the audience, but maybe not for the kids that they were originally intended for, you know?
Yeah, and like you write for the most part, except maybe the image stuff, but for everything else is mostly just like the mainstream comics that kids would read. I just started reading your Daredevil run, which is really good. But like,
I was gonna say Daredevil is probably the one that is,
that one's probably
I'm aiming at as adults.
Yeah. But and even Life Story is, I think, more adult too, because it dealt with such sensitive topics within it too that would go over a lot of people's heads as a kid.
Yeah, but what I aim for with stuff like Spider-Man comics is that a kid could still read it and get a lot from it, and maybe the adults are getting a different layer to it that the kids aren't. And you know, I liken it to like The Simpsons. Like when I was growing up, like kids loved The Simpsons, but there were so many jokes in there that just weren't for them at all.
Yeah, for sure.
But there was enough there that they were engaged with it. So you kind of, with a character like Spider-Man, you want to provide a story with action and impact, and you know, keep some of it light enough that the kids could get into it, but yeah, also weave in themes for the older readers.
Yeah, I think with your Spectacular Spider-Man run, you really nailed that like duality of this is for kids, but this is also for adults, and both of them can get completely different messages out of this, but it's both extremely fun.
Yeah, you don't want to create something for kids and kind of patronize them and create products that you're not necessarily into yourself. At least maybe that's just me. The comics I read as a kid still dealt with like life and death, and there was violence and there was romance, but you kind of grow into it as well, I think, as a reader. like I don't know, like Peter Parker's dating problems. Like when I'm 7 or 8, like I don't have those problems.
Yeah.
But I can still like part of it was feeling like you're reading something for grown-ups as
Hmm.
well, which made you feel kind of mature at a young age. I always loved that feeling.
Yeah, I remember there's an annual of a West Coast Avengers, I believe it's West Coast Avengers, where they have this game with Grandmaster where they're basically fighting all the dead Avengers,
Yeah,
and slowly every one of them starts dying because they have to stop a nuclear bomb, and they can't always stop it.
yeah,
And it ends up to just like 2 of them left alive, and like, cool, now fight again until all of you die. And I was reading that as a kid, and I'm like, oh, cool, action, the heroes battling villains, blah blah blah. But at the same time, in the back of my mind, I'm like, they're dying in this, like they're actually dying, and
yeah,
this is like, but it was played off as still a fun adventure for them because at the end they play baseball after they get
yeah.
out of it. It's like, okay, like there, it's still that thing for kids, but there's weird stakes wrapped inside of it.
Yeah, yeah, and so it's funny because like Secret Wars, especially this particular issue, it's a war.
Hmm.
Like it's the characters going to war. It's for anyone that doesn't know, it's basically a toy line. Like Marvel needed a toy line, like legitimately, and so I think it was like Hasbro or whatever the company was they're dealing with, or Mattel.
Yeah. I don't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, that's basically what they need.
Yeah,
They need some kind of big money boost.
yeah, it wasn't a money boost as much as it was they needed something to create the toy line out of and to tie into a toy line.
Hmm.
And and reading I think it was like the Marvel history book by Sean Howe. They did like testing with kids, and the 2 words that little boys loved the most was secrets and wars, and that's how it became Secret Wars.
And iconic to this day still.
Yeah, yeah, but you know, it's that weird thing as an adult when you read stuff like that and you realize, oh shit, they were just like marketing towards me. This wasn't like some creative like thing that came to them and that we have to do just to entertain, and you know,
Yeah.
but the end result was, you know, they threw in all the heroes and the villains and they're on this planet and they're battling each other, and it was just so big and awesome, and it changed things in all the titles in Marvel's line. That was incredibly awesome, but it was filled with like, you know, war stuff. It was death and hard decisions. Like in this particular issue, like the She-Hulk's in like the bad guy's compound or whatever, and she gets the shit kicked out of her. Like
Yeah.
it's brutal and it's horrible, and people, the heroes want to go and save her, but they can't. Captain America says that, you know, they have to stay to like fight Galactus or something like that. Like he has to make a decision as like a commander um, of the other heroes, and it's a hard call. And as a kid, you're reading it, you're just like, wow, like these are big adult decisions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super awesome. I don't know if it holds up. Like I haven't given it a proper reread. I think like most comics of the day, you know, there's probably a lot of exposition and catching the reader up, which kind of gets in the way of the narrative. But it still looks gorgeous. Like
Yeah.
this, the copy I have, like I don't have the comics that I had when I was a kid.
Hmm.
I gave them away when I was in college. But at HeroesCon a couple of years ago, I tracked down this particular issue in back issue bins, and I got Jim Shooter and Mike Zeck to sign it.
Oh wow.
It was like, I never do stuff like that at shows. Like
Yeah, but
at a show, like I've made it a rule since I started doing shows that I do not leave shows with books.
I
Like
mean
I'm there to
that's
sell
smart.
books. I'm there to like, you know, now I'm there to like meet fans, and you know, I'm working, and so I don't wander around. I don't buy things really.
Yeah, for sure. That's
Um,
smart.
this is the first time I've probably done that since like 2003, and knowing that Shooter and Zach were there, and I could get them to sign it. And it was
And
that weird experience where I was getting Shooter to sign it, and I really wanted to mention that I work for Marvel. But I'm also like, maybe he wouldn't take too kindly to that. And I didn't want to open it up so he could start trash talking the company while I'm standing there and nodding in agreement. Like, I didn't want it to be awkward. So, I said the usual, big fan. This issue meant a lot to me. And,
I mean, that's amazing
relatively
though.
cool about it.
That's one of those things where like I understand that rule of like you don't leave with the comics because you're working, but if you have that kind of opportunity, you kind of have to just seize it because who knows when you'll ever get that again.
Yeah, it felt like a fun thing to do. And Heroes Con is the one in Charlotte. It's such a great show because it's just comics, right? And there's no offense to the Read Pop shows or the Fan Expo shows that have a lot of celebrities and really branching off from comics themselves. But Heroes Con is about comics. It's about comic art, and it's the kind of show where it makes you feel like you want to walk around and check out back issues and original art.
And going back to the issue though, when you read it as a kid, do you remember like reading the conflicts within the issue and kind of, like understanding they were adult, but not fully like wrapping your head around exactly what the stakes were? And did you ever did you go back to that over and over again growing up at all, thinking about like you're right? Like when did you decide like you wanted to write like
that? I don't know, a couple of years ago. Like I don't know, as a kid everything seems like the end of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So like I was pretty sure She-Hulk was dead, and it feels like she's a real person, and you feel the anger of the heroes at the end when they're kind of given the okay to go take on the bad guys. Like it's everything feels larger when you're a kid. And it's very hard to recreate that now, because in comics, especially Marvel and DC books, like everyone's died and come back so many times, and it's hard to convey a sense of permanence in a fictional universe that has like the world's longest unbroken narrative. It's a tricky thing, and so I'm always conscious of the fact that I can't quite recreate that feeling from when I was a kid. So you just try to tell, like I very rarely use a major character's death. I've never killed off a major character. Because I don't see a lot of value in it at this point. But I'll create characters to kill them off. That tends to hit harder now than killing major characters would have when I was a kid, because you kind of instinctually that if I create a character and then 5 issues later they die, like they're dead. Like
who's going to use Chip's character in another story?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's possible. Like people have obviously done it before. Jerry Conway killed Gwen Stacy, but he wasn't the one to bring her back, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of thing.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. But with the thing about with you making your characters too, because reading a lot of your Marvel work, whenever you like create a character itself, you make them feel real. Like there's a lot of people who make characters in their stories, in their runs, and they kind of feel half-baked in a lot of ways. Not calling anybody out because I can't think of specifics anyways, but like they feel like they're just there to fill a role. But when I've read your work and you make a side character, you make them like you flesh them out. Like the detective, I don't remember his name, sorry, but the detective.
Cole North. Yeah,
he's like the complete package. When I read him, I'm like, it feels like he's been in Daredevil for the last 20 years.
Yeah, and when I kill him in issue 20, like it's a nice opportunity with the Marvel books to be able to create new characters and build them from the ground up, because when you inherit characters, because those characters have gone through so much, there are so many variations on them. And sometimes it's hard to land on which one you want to play with and what you can add to that hasn't been added before.
And when it comes to back when you said like when you read it as a kid, you felt like these characters were real. I know you're on the kind of the opposite side of the fence because you're writing them and you're drawing them. Do you still feel like they're real when you're writing them, or do you how do you approach writing? Do you make them real to your imagination, or do you kind of know they're fake and you're like, okay, well, like I know I could put them in these situations because they're fake, they're different, they're not someone that has limits like this.
Um, yeah, it's hard to say. Like, if the story I'm writing is a good one, then it feels like they're real. Like usually I can tell that the story is working if it feels like they're real.
That's
Like
cool.
if you have an emotional response to what you're putting down on the page, um, chances are high that you're doing your job well.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going through the motions, not that I have, but like I don't know, like every once in a while you're working on an issue and it's not clicking,
Yeah.
and it's unfortunate because you got deadlines and you have to get the product out. So yeah, there's a sense where it kind of clicks over into real, um, if you're doing your job correctly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. Like I do fiction writing in my spare time. So like when stories work, it's when the ones that like I feel the most connected, and when they don't, like I lose. It's either I'm losing interest in the idea, or the idea wasn't really there to begin with. And so I 100% get what you're saying with that.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just inertia. Like if you work on something too long, um, uh, you just want to quit.
Yeah, I mean, there's a thing where I think it was Stephen King. He said like if he takes more than like 6 weeks to finish a first draft, he gives up.
Yeah,
Because
that's
like
Stephen King.
yeah, but it's like
Did
it's
you
kind of
take
like
that from On Writing, his
I
book on
think it
writing?
was on writing. It might have been that or
Yeah,
another interview, but it was just like but then after he finishes it, he puts it in a drawer for like another 2 months and doesn't think about it,
yeah.
so he can come back to it fresh and feel more interested in it. It's just, but
That's a great book, like in terms of like describing what it takes to be a writer.
yeah.
Uh, it's the one I suggest to people whenever they ask me, should I read anything
Yeah,
about
I
some.
loan it out whenever I can. It's really
Yeah,
good.
yeah, it's really solid, and putting a thing away and coming back to it is a really smart suggestion. Uh, if I have the time, I do that. It's harder in comics because there's
Mm-hmm.
a supply chain. Like an artist needs to start drawing this.
Well,
I don't have the liberty to write a thing, put it away, come back to it, play with it again on a second draft. Like my second draft is basically um, the second I finish writing the first draft,
yeah.
I go back to the beginning and I read through it right away. That and change things. That's the second draft. And the third draft is when the editor gets the notes back to me, and it all happens so quickly. It's hard to actually get a bit of distance from it.
With your independent stuff at Image, you kind of get to play as the artist and as the writer.
Mm-hmm.
I know with you and Matt on Sex Criminals, like Matt was doing the movie, like the TV stuff and the movie stuff,
Mm-hmm.
so it took a while to get this last arc kind of going in a lot of ways. I don't know if it was
Yeah,
just
and
it was
I
and you were
was I
writing
was
it.
slow on it too.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
with White Trees, like was there deadlines that you forced on yourself, or did you have other deadlines that kind of got imposed by others?
Well, that was interesting because I worked with Chris Anka
Yeah.
and Matt Wilson on Star-Lord,
Mm-hmm.
and to this day is kind of they're like the platonic ideal of an art team. Like Chris was so professional and fast, and his storytelling is so solid
Mm-hmm.
that like every day I would just get a new page and I would just be like, "This is amazing! It's amazing!" Like it's rare that I have no notes on a book when the art comes in, but Chris and Matt especially are two of the best. And so I always told him that I would work with him whenever he was free. And one day he contacted me and he was like, "Hey, I got to start a new project, but it won't be for 3 or 4 months, which means I have time for X number of pages." Like he knew exactly the number of pages that he had time for.
Wow, like
I was like,
that's
"Oh, he
organized.
knows himself. He's a pro." And so he was like, "Can you get me a script for a new thing by it was like Christmas?" And it was a tight deadline because it was like maybe 2 weeks to write. What was it in that first one? Like 60 plus pages.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a lot of juggling because I had a bunch of other projects, but it was really liberating to write it all as one go. because I envisioned it as the 2 issues, 30 pages each, but like kind of one story. And so I wrote it as one story, and it's so rare working in the Marvel DC system to be able to sit down with a chunk of pages available to you that isn't 20 or 30.
Sure.
Like, so it was super liberating, and I really enjoyed that process, and Chris and Matt just hit it out of the park. Like their work is so gorgeous.
And I remember when I got White Trees, it took me forever to track down the first issue because it just blew up. But that being a 2-issue like solid story front to back with just Chris's amazing art and Matt's just amazing colors on it, because like they both are just like masterclass at what they do.
Yeah.
But your narrative that you were able to unravel and then tie up within 60 pages and give that world such like just filled it out with so many different characters and places and lore that you barely scratch the surface on, but enough to hook anybody that reads like the first 5 pages.
It was interesting to tackle that. I'm not a fantasy guy.
Yeah.
I'm not a world building guy, so I want to just enough details of a history to give context for what's going on. But really, I mean, the majority of the work is done by Chris and Matt, because it's the designs of the world that kind of give the illusion of more to it, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
And working on the 20-page monthlies for Marvel kind of trains you to do more with less, to get more information as naturally as possible in a short span of time. So it makes me more comfortable creating a whole new thing within 60 pages, which seems luxurious, really.
Yeah. To move on to the other comic you brought with you for this, which one did you bring for that one?
Okay, so I brought Fantastic Four issue 352, and I'm actually opening the bag right now. You can hear it popping it out. No, this is a book that came out in 91. So I was in high school. I was probably grade 9, grade 10. And when I was a kid, I grew up on the John Byrne Fantastic Four. I loved it. After he left, I was a little heartbroken. And I tried to follow it for, maybe 6 months, and then just kind of gave up. It just didn't have the same feel. But then Walt Simonson took over Fantastic Four, writing and drawing it. And I was a fan of his on his Thor run. And so I was like, at that point I was feeling almost a little too old for it. But I remember picking up the first issue because I had such a fondness for Simonson.
Yeah.
And it blew me away. It was such a fun first issue. And just big and grand and very Fantastic Four with guest stars and giant cosmic issues, and I was hooked. And it's a relatively short run on the title, and I don't know how much kind of play it got at the time, but it's my favorite FF run. And so this particular issue, I think about it probably once every couple of weeks, because it does stuff with narrative and time that I haven't seen done with any other comic. And I'll explain a bit of it. So basically in the preceding issue, it's kind of a classic FF setup where, Fantastic Four and Latveria and, Doom is back and he's badder than ever. And Simonson drew an awesome new costume for him. So he has them all trapped, but Reed Richards is free and for somehow. And on the cover, you see kind of him coming at you in a big explosion. But it's him fighting Dr. Doom throughout time, not like dinosaurs or anything like that. It's throughout minutes. It's like going back and forth in like micro jumps. So the way the issue is structured is, as soon as they start doing that, on the left-hand side of each page, there's a timestamp telling you what the actual time is. So chronologically, it follows, standard time constructs. On the right side, it's them in the time stream, mm-hmm. where when there's a time code, it means they've jumped, and you have to go to that page to see where they jumped to. So it's using a physical comic book page and splitting it up in such a way that you can read the issue through twice to see the story and how it interacts in time. But the best part of the whole thing is, at one point, Doom shoots this blast at Mr. Fantastic, and Mr. Fantastic blips it, like sends the blast through time. And that's when you realize that the cover of the issue, the explosion, is future Reed freeing past Reed. So the cover becomes part of the narrative, which is just, at the time, I remember the first go through reading, I was like confused. I'm just like, what's going on? I don't get this. And then when you go through it again, you're like, oh shit, that is smart and so Fantastic Four-ish and fun. And also he does some really nice effects with the time jumping too. Like he uses a lot of zip tone, letraset to make all those sections feel different. So it's gorgeous art, it's smart storytelling, and it's a big Fantastic Four story that kind of resets the Doom as a big bad. Because it kind of became a joke for a while. And so part of Simonson's run was, Doom's fighting Doom bots, trying to regain his throne. And then all of a sudden this mysterious figure shows up, and it's like this Doom in a futuristic, Doom armor, mm-hmm. like glowing red eyes. And he's like, oh, I've been away too long. And he reveals that that Doom's a Doom bot, that he's been gone for years. Like all these FF adventures where they fought Doom, where it's kind of pitiful. They weren't the real Doom. And it plants an idea in the reader's head that, shit, maybe he hasn't been Doom this whole time. Maybe like the first two appearances were the only legit appearances. Which is kind of as a writer now, I really appreciate that kind of mild retcon.
Like that's a masterful retcon if I've ever heard one.
Yeah, because it's like, it doesn't invalidate all the stories, but it puts into doubt in the reader's mind which ones were Doom. Because he kind of mentions, like, I've come back to Earth once in a while.
And it gives the reader their opportunity to choose what's their Doom. Mm-hmm. Which I think is really like important in a lot of ways when it comes to reading so many comic books, is kind of like letting the readers choose what's quote unquote continuity for them in a lot of ways.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of sticking to such a staunch continuity, which kind of gets messy when you get to the longer characters.
Yeah, and it's funny, like, everything I know of Walt Simonson and having interacted with him, he's like the nicest man in comics. Like he just is. Like everyone will agree on that.
I've heard nothing but good things about him.
I know, he's amazing. So it's a very Walt Simonson move, because he doesn't want the previous writers to feel like he's slagged them. Mm-hmm. But also he recognizes that Doom was not the threat that he should be mm-hmm. up to that point. So it was a really smart move. So I think about that issue a lot whenever I'm writing a standard comic issue, and I'm just like, Simonson did it all better in 1991.
It's like everybody should have retired then, and we could have been happy with what we had.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think, with talking about Simonson kind of giving Doom kind of his teeth back with this issue, do you think that's where we come to the conclusion now that Doom's probably the best villain in the Marvel universe, with like how smart he is, and you kind of root for him at times, because he's one of those villains that once he gets going, eventually he starts making sense. Either he's just convinced you, or you're tired of hearing him talk.
Yeah, I can't say for certain if he's the best villain. He's the most fun to write.
Yeah, that's
I think a lot of writers, like, we have our list, and our lists tend to be the same characters. Like Doom is fun to write, Namor is fun to write, Ben Grimm is fun to write. Emma Frost is fun to write. Like they all have very distinct voices. Most of them are dickish.
Yeah.
But they're a ton of fun to write.
It's all those characters that let you write your inner monologue that you can't say to people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think about
and a lot of villains. They start off really strong, and you're just like, oh yeah, this is the best new villain. But then if they become popular, then they get overdone and watered down, or made into too much of a hero or something.
Yeah, they stop being villains in a lot of ways. I think about that with Jason Todd and Harley in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and then they start to kind of go back and forth, and ends up just kind of upsetting people because they're like, oh, I prefer him as a hero, I prefer him as a villain, and so there is the kind of watering down that happens with all of them. And again, as I pointed out earlier, it happened to Doom for sure, and it continues to happen to the character, depending on appearances. The characters are all very malleable, but the downside to that is they are, so you kind of move away from what the core should be and what Marvel needs the character to be, because Marvel doesn't have a lot of great villains, but almost always the villains kind of stop being villains, and it makes for really fun and interesting stories, but then you just lost another villain.
I think honestly, even in DC too, like the bigger the villain is, at some point they stop being a villain, except with like maybe the cases of the really big bads like Joker, Darkseid, Thanos in a lot of ways.
Marvel's a lot worse with that, I think.
Yeah.
Like
I think about
like
Lex.
all the top ones, like Dr. Octopus was Spider-Man.
Yeah, and he was a good Spider-Man in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Magneto obviously, goes back and forth. Doom was infamous Iron Man. Juggernaut, like there's not a lot of villains. Sandman, like he's the classic one that goes back and forth. Venom. Yeah, I mean Norman Osborn.
I was thinking, what's it? Not Secret Invasion, but after that, where he becomes like he's basically like, I'm making my own Avengers.
Yeah, but they're. I mean, his plans are still evil.
Yeah, true.
Like whereas Sandman, he always has like an actual, change of heart, and Venom is like the main one. Like Eddie Brock stopped being a villain. He's super cool now, but you sometimes you miss having the pool of villains to play with.
Yeah,
but as an adult, to write an interesting story, you need to have the reader empathize with the villain, and sometimes that pushes them over into almost a heroic category.
Yeah, and I think about with the villains that get their own like solo series, like Doom has right now, and how Venom technically has, even though Venom's more of a hero than a villain in that weird gray area. It's hard to sell a straight villain book, and it takes like a really extremely, I think, talented writer and like creative team to nail a best-selling villain book where the villain through the whole book stays a villain.
The current Doctor Doom monthly,
it's real good.
It's fantastic. It's probably the best book Marvel's putting out.
I was thinking about that scene where you said that Dr. Doom is really fun to write. The scene between him and Kronos recently, where they're like arguing about like who's better in a lot of ways, and at the end they just kind of they maniacal laugh together because they're just having fun as villains.
Yeah. It's funny. Like I read the PDFs as they come in. Like there's like a list of Marvel creators that just to kind of keep up with what's going on. So I don't even know if like the issues I read have come out. But there's an issue of Doom recently that's mostly just him talking to his subordinates, and it's so glorious. It's so well done, and it makes you love him and hate him at the same time. Like the writer was like Christopher Cantwell. Like he does such a great job at balancing that out. Like. Because you're right, it is hard to have a villain as the lead of a series. Because eventually they stop being a villain. But he's a great writer because he always serves to remind you at some point. Oh shit, no, this is Dr. Doom we're talking about, which is great.
Some other great villain-led titles I think of Colin Bunn's two villain titles that I think about the most are like Sinestro and Magneto.
Okay, yeah.
Like in those ones they make Sinestro and Magneto sympathetic in a lot of ways, but through the whole book they're doing some real nasty stuff. And you're like, and you're on that weird thing where you're like, I root for you, but boy, you're still in the wrong in a lot of ways. And I guess horror, like anybody that writes horror really well, kind of can get into that really fun negative zone. And then when they transfer it to a villain, like it just kind of fits well.
Yeah, for sure.
That's probably why.
But it's funny. I was thinking a lot about this week because I was offered a title. And so I started doing research and like heroes and villains, and I found this one villain, like, oh yeah, like I'm reading an old issue of a book and I hit this villain. I'm like, oh, I forgot about this guy. He's so cool and he's so great and he's so mysterious and evil. And then I'm like, all right, I wonder what he's been up to since this arc. And then you read the Wikipedia page with the character, and he's like, oh fuck, he's just ruined. Like he's just been through so much, and he's up and down, he's good and he's bad, and he's destroyed and he's brought back and he's weak now, and like it's hard to know what to ignore sometimes in terms of continuity with a villain. I had difficulty with that. Like I wrote a Spider-Man issue with Sandman, and then when you research enough about the character, you're just like, he's been through everything. Like, these characters have been through so much. Every supporting character in Spider-Man has been a villain, has been dead, has come back. Like supporting characters, not just villains or heroes. Like I'm talking like your Betty Brands and your Ned Leeds and your Flash Thompsons.
Yeah, like seriously, especially with Spider-Man. Jeez.
Yeah, it's a lot, and it's hard to present them with a thing where they won't just go, what? So what? I've seen everything. Like to actually elicit an emotional response in some of these characters when they've been around for so long and they've been through so much. Like you have to have their emotions ignore their history a little bit to be faced with like someone dying and have them like be sad and angry about the death, even though they themselves have been killed and brought back 5 times. Like you have to kind of shut off a bit of continuity in your head to write some of the characters.
I want to get back to the Simonson issue, but before that, we're talking about villains and heroes and kind of like the way they're written. With Invaders, like you had a very interesting challenge, but I guess with Namor, it's not super hard because of how he's been written a lot. But making Namor a villain, but also at the same time, he really is a hero, doing what he thinks is best, but he's being manipulated, and he has a lot of trauma that hasn't been dealt with. And like, how'd you come up with that in the first place? But two, like, how did you do that so delicately? Because like, I feel like you nailed it personally, but I'm just a fan, so who knows?
No, thanks. Yeah, it was definitely a challenge because with Namor, I want to explore the concept of PTSD without directly invoking it, because it's a real thing and people go through it, especially in wartime, and you don't want to make it feel smaller by giving it to a comic book character and then they get over it by the end and move on, So to do it properly, you kind of have to leave into the Marvel universe of it all and the comic book of it all and kind of mask it so it becomes a bit of a metaphor.
Yeah.
Like having it so it was like Xavier that kind of fucked with his brain and that created this extra character in his head, like, a very Marvel universe kind of solution to this issue. And that's what's kind of creating these feelings and him lashing out and having these mental difficulties. It felt like the way to go with it.
Yeah.
Like I knew going into the series what Jason Aaron was doing with him in Avengers, which was, like we just discussed, like bringing him back to being a bad guy again.
Yeah.
A bad guy with a point of view, which is the best kind of bad guy.
Yeah.
Because you are always questioning whether or not his decisions are the right ones or not. And so I wanted to be able to continue that, create kind of a reason for him and his kind of flip-flopping. Because John Byrne did it back in the day. Like in the old Namor series that he wrote and drew, he had it so Namor discovered that it was like an oxygen imbalance. I was making him like turn villain.
I love old comic
essentially.
science.
I know, and it's like when I first read it, I'm like, oh, this is a great solution. But then I'm like, well, if he's got the solution, then why does this keep happening?
Yeah.
Like as soon as you come up with a solution, that solidifies him. That's like, okay, now he's going to be consistent. And you can't really do that with a character like Namor. So I wanted to create the added wrinkle of this character within his head that was kind of pushing his darker impulses. And so I wanted to make sure I left it at the end of Invaders where he's his own man again, but he also recognizes that at his core, he's done these bad things. And at his core, he believes these things as well. So it allows the other writers after me to take what they want from this, you know? Like you kind of want to give them that almost as a gift. Like, hey, if you want to play him, you know, as full-on villain, you can. If you want to play him as hero, you can. I've got an explanation for why he's been the way he is, but now he's a new thing that can be either or both.
Yeah, and what's great with like when you said you did with Namor and kind of like it's kind of like the flip side of what Walt Simonson did with Doom. It's like you're not doing this is my stance, and if you want to write this character, you're gonna have to wipe my stance away.
Yeah.
And I know there's some creators who like when they write characters like I want my thing to be as definitive as possible. So you're pushing the next writer's hand in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And like that also doesn't become as fun because then you handcuff writers in ways that maybe they weren't ready to like tackle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Going back to now the Simonson issue itself, you say you think about it once a week. Back then when you read it in high school, how did it influence you into like forward into college and into now to writing? Like did it start then? Were you thinking about it weekly, or did it slowly kind of creep up on you like that?
It's more of a recent thing since I started writing them professionally. Like I didn't have designs on being a comic book writer. I enjoyed writing them, and I would draw kind of my own kind of fan books when I was in high school. And by fan books, I mean like a fan page or two, because then I get bored and move on.
Yeah.
When I left high school, I went to school for illustration and became an editorial illustrator. And I did a lot of work for newspapers and magazines, and I did comics on the side. But at that point, I really stopped thinking about superhero comics, except that I kind of followed them online, like fantasy football.
Yeah. Okay.
I knew everything that was happening in them. I knew all the creators, who they were, what the titles were, what the storylines were, but I wasn't necessarily buying or reading them. Unless friends of mine were working on them. So I really hadn't considered a career in writing comics until basically I started writing them. And it was like a natural progression because I wrote my own stuff, which was fun and quirky. And then my friend Matt wanted to do a book, and I wanted to do a book, and we did Sex Criminals together as a lark. But when that took off, it drew some attention from Marvel and DC, more specifically Marvel, and an editor there who had read one of my older comics years before recognized that I could write somewhat, and so offered me like a small gig, and I did the small gig, and then it became a bigger gig, and it became another gig, and it was a very natural progression that wasn't planned in the least. So once I started to really start writing Marvel comics, I really started thinking about them again.
Yeah.
Like up until that point, I was buying, like I said, friends' books and a couple of titles that really jumped out at me. But when it became my kind of surprise career, I got a lot more invested, and I started to revisit older books that affected me, and you kind of reverse engineer them. Like, wow, how did this work? Why did this affect me so much? And the Simonson run was one of them, and it had a relentless pace to it. It had giant ideas, but also really great character moments, and stellar art and design. And this issue is just like, it just stands on its own as such a well executed, brilliant idea. So yeah, so I really didn't think about this issue for like a decade or two, and then it became the kind of book that I thought about a lot in more recent years.
That I think that's one of the greatest things about comic books, because especially now doing this show a lot, I think about the stuff I read as a kid, because I started reading when I was super young. And um, with comics, they're such an art form that's more passively enjoyed than actively enjoyed in a way, where you kind of read them and you forget about them, and movies kind of stick with you longer, unless it's like a huge book. But then when you start working on your own creative projects or working in the same field as comics in a lot of ways, then they start becoming active in the back of your brain, and you remember the stuff you read as a kid, and like they kind of just start eat at you in that way. And it's super wild, because I was thinking about the first book I ever bought, which I was planning on going in deeper talk later about, but it was like an Ultimate Spider-Man number 27, I think it was.
Okay.
And when I read that as a kid, I was like, I don't know what's happening. Spider-Man's just running through his school trying to stop Rhino, and at the end he doesn't stop him. Iron Man stops him. Okay, cool, that was fun. But now as I'm writing or doing this, thinking about the books I read, I'm like, oh, that whole book was about how Peter fails a lot.
Yeah.
And can't get his life together to do one thing. The one thing he needs to do, which is be a hero. And at the end, someone has to pick up the slack for him, because he can't fix his own life to do it.
Yeah, for sure.
And like, it didn't even cross my mind that was about that until like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. So quick question: where did you buy that comic?
There was a local store where I live in like more in Northern California. There was a local store that was called All the Good Stuff and More. That's what was the name of the comic shop. And my dad took me there one day. He's like, "Hey, let's buy a comic. I know you like them. Let's buy them." Because he used to just get them at like garage sales or used stores, like thrift stores, but not a new one. So I looked at the shop. I'm like, that's Spider-Man, and I'm gonna buy that Spider-Man, because it was just him on the cover on like a flagpole. So I had no idea what else was in there.
Yeah. Those the ultimate covers. It was an interesting experiment, because each cover was just like kind of an airbrushy looking hero pose. It was very generic, but it looked great, because it's still Bagley drawing it. But yeah, it didn't really tell you anything about the story inside, which was a really interesting idea at that point.
They kind of put the whole story idea in like they have like subtitles for every issue on the comic itself, which I thought is a super interesting idea for the way they do covers, because like comics will say like a kind of like a catchphrase, but like the Ultimate books will have like like it'll say Mystic Knights, and Spider-Man's actually messing with the Mystic Knights in this book. That's actually what the plot is.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just like a hot phrase. They'll like say like Batman versus everybody, but he fights one person.
Yeah.
but it's the way to get people in it.
Yeah. Well, I always think of the Silver Age books, where they came up with the cover first.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like basically like the editor would be like, I actually don't know if it was the editor or the artist who would do it, but basically like they would create a cover where it's just like, oh, it's Batman, but Superman's been turned into an ape, and Batman's like, I need to save Superman from being an ape, but if I do, the Flash drowns. Like, it's just like a ludicrous premise, and then they have to like write the comic based on the cover.
Now that you explain it, I have some of those books, and I have gone back and reread them, because like I've been going through my collection recently when I've had all this free time, and a lot of times they have to make those stories like make sense, but they can't click it.
Yeah, no, it's like an improv game or something. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and I can't remember who. It was on a Word Balloon episode recently, but I can't remember who it was. But they talk about how people talk about the old creators as they were like legends, and they were doing this amazing work, but they were really working for a paycheck, and they weren't. And they might have been thinking about how epic this was as they were writing it, but the main focus was get this done, so I can get paid, so I can feed my family. And so that's why some of those books just exist like that.
Yeah, and there's this other element to it, like because they were the first people making these stories, like they weren't fans.
Yeah, exactly.
They didn't grow up reading, The Flash, So So they knew very much so that they were just creating these books for kids. And, you put your work into it and you want it to look good, but you also recognize, it's the paycheck and, getting the book done on time and hopefully getting another gig.
Yeah. And it's super fascinating that, like, when you put that contextualized like that, because I always grew up thinking of like Jack Kirby, Stanley, all that, just as the heroes, and they're like, they knew what they were doing. But they were really just like, I have an idea, let's get it on paper and see what happens.
Yeah,
hopefully we get paid.
And they pushed the medium. It's not like there wasn't artistry there. Like,
yeah,
obviously with a guy like Kirby, like, he was trying radically different and new things in his career. But yeah, ultimately you got to get paid. Like, I forget, I don't know if it's a real story or not, but there's a story about, like, in the Marvel office, like, it was like John Buscema and John Romita, and they were working, and it was like on a deadline, and John Buscema saw, like, John Romita, like, erasing something, and Buscema just, like, grabbed his eraser and threw it away. And he's like, "You're paid to draw, not erase."
Yeah, that makes
and his reasoning was like you're John Romita, like, your bad drawing is better than anyone's best drawing.
Yeah,
like,
so
no one's going to be able to tell that this isn't up to your level of perfection.
And, like, deadlines are crazy now, because I hear you guys talk about it all the time here in interviews. But I when I read and hear some of the old stories, deadlines were insane back then.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
but there was a looser way of working as well.
Yeah.
The what's kind of demanded of a comic now is definitely more than what was demanded at the time. You look at Kirby pencils; they're very quick. Like, you can see the speed and the looseness in them because he had to do like 5 books a month. They worked incredibly hard. I'm not saying like, oh, we have it so tough.
Yeah,
but there was more of an assembly line happening at that point, because they needed to get the marquee names out there.
Yeah, because as I said, at the same time, like, they all worked in the same office together. Like, when you draw something and it has to be inked by someone else, you're gonna have to forward it to that person. Hopefully, they get it the first time, because who knows with emails and scanning and all that stuff? Because sometimes things just don't go through. And like working together in an office, you can't have that factory like setting where Jack draws it, hands it over, they ink it, color it, gone.
Yeah, I don't know how many of them worked in the office together at the same time. I think there'd be instances where they would like set up and work in the office, but I think for the most part, Stanley created the illusion that it was like everyone worked in the bullpen, but really you just like drive into New York once a week and deliver your pages and talk to Stan.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Romita worked in-house at some point, obviously, because he became the art director, and he had an art team called the Romita's Raiders that would do the quick jobs and do the fixes on pages.
I think it was in that Marvel history book, because I read it too. There's that scene where at the end of like Ditko's run on Spider-Man where he was just mad and he would just drop off pages and walk out.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, so like, yeah, that's for sure. Like, especially the bigger guys, they probably just did it from their house all the time. So I don't want to keep you for too much longer, but I do have some questions. So I have some Facebook questions first. Annie would like to know when we might get more Black Sand tales. She thought White Trains was phenomenal and she's ready for more.
It's in the works. There are a few wrinkles. One is that Chris Anka is working on Spider-Verse 2.
Which is so cool, though.
It's super cool. And he's, I can say right now, I've definitely written more and Chris has drawn more. But we're still a ways out from an actual like official announcement on what it is exactly.
Is it gonna? I don't know if you can say this exactly, but is it gonna be another like 2 issues tale, or are you planning on doing a longer?
The story is longer, and is broken up in a different way.
Gotcha. Okay.
But it continues the tale. It takes place directly after the previous series.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Joseph asks, do you have any intentions to revisit the world of Spider-Man life story? He really wants more of that world's Captain America and Iron Man.
It would be cool. The only problem is that I don't want to.
Yeah, that's fair.
And not out of a lack of love for it. Like, it was such a great project to work on. Marvel let me basically do what I wanted with it, and being able to craft a whole universe with the best editor in the business, Tom Brevoort. It was an absolute joy, but it was also the hardest project I've ever done.
Yeah, I bet.
To reconcile all that history within the format, to create a satisfying narrative overall, and individual issues, was really, really tricky. And yeah. So I mean, Marvel's talked to me about doing more of them, and I've politely declined. And part of it is also I kind of want to see other people do it.
Yeah, as well as my follow-up questions, like, do you know if they're thinking about handing it to a different writer to kind of play in that world?
Yeah, maybe. For all I know, they may have already done it. I'm not privy to all the conversations. Like, basically, my interactions on that stop as soon as I say I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
Though I did say I'd be open to doing covers, because I enjoy doing the covers on the original series. But the main question that the editor and the creative teams that follow have to face is, do you set it in that same universe, or do you create a new universe each time?
Yeah.
There are pros and cons, obviously. But I think you'd probably tell a more satisfying story by creating a new universe each time. So you're not beholden to the designs Mark did and the directions that I took for the other Marvel characters. Because for FF, Iron Man, and Cap, like I laid down some definitive things in the Spider-Man story that have happened to those characters, and I don't know how much fun it would be for another writer to come in and do a life story and have to touch on the stuff that I set up.
Yeah, for sure. I get that. But with life story too, another follow-up question, because I just thought of this. Were you inspired in any way by John Byrne's Generations?
Strangely, no.
Okay, I was just curious though, because I was thinking about I just realized that how strangely kind of similar they are in a way.
No, they're totally similar, and I didn't realize it until issue 1 already came out, and people were like, "Oh, this is like Generations." And I had a faint memory of it because my brother was collecting DC when I was collecting Marvel, and yeah, I feel a little bad that trampled on that idea a little bit.
In a way, John Byrne's version goes way, way further in a lot of different areas. But
yeah, because it's like, because it's kind of like Silver Age-y, all those kind of concepts kind of brought forth to the future, right?
Yeah, and like I think it covers like almost 100 years.
Yeah,
and he I mean, all three ones are just different aspects of the same story, which are fascinating to see that play out.
Yeah, whereas this this was mostly an exercise in seeing if I could still hit all the same beats of Spider-Man's history, but updated to reflect the aging in real time.
Yeah.
Yeah. One interesting tidbit is the original name of the book was Marvel Age. Which is so perfect.
Yeah, no, life stories are great names.
What's happening in the book? They're aging. It's like it's such a perfect title, and apparently Marvel didn't want to go for it because they were using the Marvel Age brand elsewhere, or had recently used it elsewhere. I'm just like, damn it! Like, beat me to the punch. That one hurt. I didn't even come up with it. Tom Brevoort came up with it because he's been. When I approached him with the idea, he was like, this has been pitched to me a bunch of times, and he's given it a lot of thought, and he had the name Marvel Age in his head. I'm like, this is perfect. That's amazing. And then we found out that we couldn't use it.
That's such a great name too, for like a not like an imprint, but like a side series, and you could just like then put the subtitle of any character.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem was they used that imprint for like a kids line at some point, and so there was already a connection there with the title, which is a little sad.
And Dina asks, is there any character from the big two that you want to draw or write still?
Um,
Like one you haven't done yet.
yeah, not really. It's a tricky question because I tend to not think ahead in that manner.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't have like a checklist where I'm like, oh, I need to do this, I need to do that. Like usually what happens is if an editor approaches me with a project, I give it a lot of thought at that point just to see if I can come up with a good story. But I'm not really pre-writing books that I'm not on, you
Yeah.
know.
No, I get that.
And there's also the added element of you don't want to say, oh yeah, I'd love to write Daredevil when somebody else is writing it.
Yeah.
Because it sounds a little bit like I want your job.
Yeah, no, for sure.
like
And
like you know, I have some friends, comic writers who actively tell me that they want to write Daredevil, but we're buddy enough that it's fine and it's funny. But like I don't know if I took a shot at like saying, you know, I want to write, you know, Captain Carrot, and like Josh Williams is writing Captain Carrot, and like it's his dream book and it's his paycheck, and I'm putting that out there in the world. Like, and an editor hears that and they're like, oh, maybe we want Chip on Captain Carrot. Like, fucking sucks, man.
yeah, and I guess you don't want the other opposite effect to happen where you're like, I want to write such and such character, and they're like, oh yeah, why don't you? And you're like, oh wait, I have to turn this down because I'm booked right now.
Yeah,
And now you kind of just burned that area.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've never quite gotten to that problem. I have had the situation where I've been approached to write a book or a character and that I've been like a lifelong fan of, and then I'm just like, this is amazing, what a great opportunity, and then I spend a week think about it and I'm like, I have no stories to tell with this character.
Yeah.
And I was like, shit, and then you have to basically like bow out, which is that's the hardest email. It's always confusing to an editor too, because they're just like, well, it's a fucking job, why are you turning down a job? I'm like, if I can't do a good job at it, like,
You don't want to do it then.
and it's a character I love, like, yeah, there's not a lot of point to this.
Yeah, and as I think we talked about earlier, it's like there are books you read that you're like, oh, this person just kind of did it for the check at that point.
Yeah, and sometimes those can be good, but
yeah, there's a lot of times they're just missing a little bit of that kind of heart when it comes to writing something you're super passionate about.
Yeah.
On Twitter, Doom Richards asks, how would you say Doom's relationship with the Fantastic Four has changed from 2-in-1 to X-Men Fantastic Four?
Well, in between is Dan Slott, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So, Dan did the reset on Doom. I mean, technically Bendis did it at the end of his run, but Dan leaned into kind of a more classic Doom, which, to be fair, like we were talking earlier, is you kind of need Doom as a villain. Like I don't think you can keep him as a hero forever.
Yeah.
It adds an interesting layer to him, but yeah, so that's basically what's changed. And so I'm writing him to reflect Dan's version. But also, I mean, I tend to write Doom as a bit snarkier, maybe. There are a few lines in the X-Men FF series that I'm pretty happy with, like where he just kind of like cuts into Reed a bit.
My favorite, I read this one. I read the whole like monologue to my dad when I first read it. It's I want to say it's in the last issue that came out. I think it was issue 3, maybe 2, where he's talking to one of the X-Men about power and about how he had to earn his while you were just born with. But he went into that full like villain monologue, and at the same time, like he's right though, like he's 100% right.
Yeah, that's what makes it interesting. Like I love the new X-Men status quo. What Hickman and the other writers have done. It's just been fascinating, and it's a great experiment, and it adds a level of nuance to the characters, right? And yeah, so I find the trick with dealing with that situation is you can look at it from a real world point of view, or you can look at it from a Marvel Universe point of view. And you kind of you can't go full real world with it, because if you went full real world, it's like, this is crazy. Like, like these guys are monsters and we need to stop them. But if you lean into Marvel Universe of it more so, like, no, they've been done wrong and this makes a lot of sense. But you want to like sprinkle the real world in there.
Yeah.
Which is what Doom is doing, kind of like giving a slight dose of reality there that, these are beings of power. And yeah, they're not better than other humans as a result of that, but they're acting and they're treating the situation like they are. Like the most fun wrinkle is that Hickman introduced, I think, is the fact that they're all treated as ambassadors.
Yeah.
They can't be tried. Like, it's a bonkers concept. Like the idea that like, Wolverine, because he has claws coming out of his body, it means he can do whatever he wants. Like, like that's insanity. But it works. It works within the Marvel universe. Like, it works fully there.
Yeah.
So Doom is just kind of pointing out, like, no, I had to build myself up. And the way I've treated Doom in the past, I got to write a Marvel 2-in-1 annual, which went into a bit of his childhood stuff. He's got that chip on his shoulder. Like, he's the king basically of Latveria, but he's not descended from royalty.
Yeah, he made it.
There's no lineage. He created that. He is about like earned power versus inherited power, which is an interesting talking point these days.
Yeah, for sure.
When you deal with kind of inequality of income and wealth, across North America, Doom is weirdly a voice saying like, he's Drake saying I started from the bottom.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's weird. It's weirdly how like the most American dream, actual American dream person in the Marvel universe is Doom.
Yeah,
one of the worst villains.
Yeah. But the thing is, he got the power, and then what he did with it is what makes him the villain, right? What he did with it is like, try to take over the world, try to kill people, like rule with an iron fist. That's the extra level that, of course, he doesn't talk about when he's talking to the X-Men.
Yeah. And speaking about X-Men status quo, I think my favorite issues of the Hickman run so far still is that one whole, I think it's like issue 4, the whole issue where they're having that political talk at the table, and it's just Magneto going to town on every politician in that room about how like, we're just doing what you're doing, but you don't like it because we're mutants.
It's such a smart issue. It's my favorite issue. It's my favorite issue too. And I was discussing this with a comic writer the other day, and the comic writer was like, I like it all, but like, it just doesn't feel very superhero-ish. And I'm like, no, that's the point. Like, you've read superhero books all your life and you know the beats of them, but with this, you don't know the beats. And you can pull out an issue like that where it's just like, it's a dinner conversation. And it's fascinating and it's tense in a way that like a superhero fist fight knocking down buildings isn't tense, right?
Yeah, for sure. And like that's why with you and with Hickman and with King and a bunch of other writers right now, all of you guys are pulling out these like one-off issues at least, but even like entire runs where the whole idea of what a superhero comic book is just kind of flipped. And you go in not knowing what's about to happen, and that's most fun for me, honestly. Is like not expecting the beats, but then the beats being just completely out of order.
Yeah. Like, it's talking earlier about character deaths and how it's not surprising anymore. Like, the way to surprise a reader is to give them something completely new. And yeah, like sometimes I'll write a comic and be like, I'll look at it afterwards and I'm like, oh, this feels just like a Marvel comic. And that's not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Like sometimes you end up in the trap where you can write a thing and it feels almost like autopilot, and then you look at it and you're just like, God, I could have like what can I add to this? How can I change this in such a way where it's where it stands out, where I can say this is the best thing that's out this month. Like, yeah, that's a challenge.
For me, reading your Daredevil run, it's every single time Matt's in the church. Like we all know how Catholic Matt Murdock is in a lot of ways, but like every time he's in the church, every discussion he has with the priest as a kid and as an adult in that church, in that first volume, is so poetic in a lot of ways, but also it's not. You're in the middle of a murder mystery kind of
Yeah.
And you take these beats to wax philosophically about just life and what it means to be human and to live with your sins and what is even a sin in a lot of ways. Like,
Yeah, and he's the character you get to do that with. Like that's why it's the one title that I actively pursued
mm-hmm.
at Marvel, because you can more easily kind of go off and do a different type of superhero story.
Yeah, I don't think there's a normal Daredevil book. Every Daredevil book is different. Every Daredevil run is different from the last.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a testament to Frank Miller
Mm-hmm.
for kind of setting that tone by basically breaking mainstream comics and kind of building them back up again with his run, especially Born Again with Mazzucchelli. That I think creators that have come on that book since are always trying to do something different as a result. Because you can with Daredevil in a way you can't with Spider-Man. Like Spider-Man represents the company. Spider-Man, there's rules on how you deal with that character, and if you want to change a thing, there are a lot of discussions with people who make more money than you.
Yeah.
With Daredevil, it's like you can kind of do what you want with him. He's not an X-Men. He's not an Avenger. He's not Fantastic Four. Like he's his own thing. He's basically the most human of the characters. So if you want to go off and do a more kind of adult tale, you can.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best things about all the Daredevil runs too, especially since, like from Frank Miller onward, is like they're consistently the best run of that character in a weird way. Like everybody will have their favorites, but like it's hard to argue that like Brubaker's run isn't the best run and Bendis' run isn't the best run, and that Mark Waid's two runs with Sammy aren't the best runs. But then you get with your run and you get with Charles Soule's run, like they're also great runs and they're like becoming the best runs in their time.
Yeah. I mean, I think creators really rise to the challenge when it comes to Daredevil.
And it's fun to watch the artists that meet them at their challenges too, because it always feels like the perfect pairing.
Yeah, and so much of the success of Daredevil is tied into the continuity of artists, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't think of Bendis' run without Maleev, or Brubaker and Lark, or Wade and Samney, Nocenti and John Romita Jr. Like, it really, really highlights like how important it is to have a consistent team on a book. Like it's hard when all of those runs had fill-in artists, and we're no exception. Like Marco is the main artist. We've had some great fill-ins and secondary artists, but the book would be completely different without Marco there.
Yeah, for sure. It's crazy to think how some people kind of forget how hard it is to be a consistent team on a monthly book, because like there's a lot of work that goes into those books, especially on the art side. There's an insane amount of work.
Yeah, Marco sent me a page this week from, was it issue 23, I think? And it's just gorgeous, and like the backgrounds are immaculate and awesome and stylish, and I wrote him and I'm just like, I want to know how you do this. Like I know some of the elements, like there's computer programs for 3D rendering and stuff, but he's like, hey, next time you're in like Venice, come by my studio and I'll show you how I do it. But it seems so laborious and intense. I can't imagine him having a life, even just doing one issue over like 5-6 weeks.
And I love seeing like whenever an artist like that does like a live version of them drawing a page or something, and it just looks effortless in a lot of ways.
Well, I mean, whenever artists do like live drawings, they're always showing the best parts. And they're not showing like the 2 hours of researching Google Images on what manhole covers look like or fire hydrants.
That's one of my favorite reasons to follow Mitch on Twitter, is because he'll just post some of the most random things he has to do to get the art that he wants.
Yeah.
And he also posts like mistakes that he made and stuff. And it's like, okay, Mitch is like, I'm not perfect, and this is the process. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, we all go through it. Like I'm working on a bunch of projects right now where I'm just like, God, the photos I've been taking of myself are just so unflattering. But you need to do what you got to do to get the art done.
That's one thing I would love one day is just like a group of artists. Like, here's a picture of all of our references that we took, like a book of just reference photos.
Yeah, and I mean, at one point years ago, I posted a photo which was all of my kind of like my photo booth photos from my Mac, just me doing stupid stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and just thousands of photos. It's just insane. It's so much easier being an artist now. Like when I first started out, I assisted an illustrator in kind of a big shared studio. There's a lot of classic illustrators, like romance style guys, and their reference was like filing cabinets full of photos that they've clipped out from magazines and newspapers or taken themselves. Like you would go through the files and be like, okay, I need street scenes. You find a folder that has street scenes. It would just be full of stuff they've collected for years. Like whenever an illustrator retired, they would bequeath that to another illustrator. Like it was like a passing of a baton or something. Like it was such a big deal to get the reference material from an older illustrator. And now it's like, you can just Google it. It's great.
Last question that I have, I'm not even sure if you can answer this one, but Andrew
Right.
Gordon just asked, since the release date's all messed up with the pandemic, do you have any idea when Volume 3 of Daredevil is going to come out?
I think yesterday Marvel actually released that information.
Okay, cool. So
I don't know it off the top of my head. Like, it's funny when people ask me about like release dates for stuff. I'm just like I'm done with that issue. I wrote that like 7 months ago. I have no idea. If I was actively buying them, then I'd know. But sometimes I mark on my calendar when something's coming out, so I can remind myself to promote it that week. But yeah, I don't know off the top of my head, but I know Marvel just released a list of dates for the next, or for June anyways. Because I think like end of May is when they're coming back, and I think Daredevil's maybe June 6th, I want to say. 10th, June 10th. Sounds good.
It's always fun to hear like writers talk about how far ahead in their schedule they are, but they're still kind of like trying to hit deadlines because they're supposed to be far ahead in their schedule.
Yeah, it's all the artists, like
yeah.
We got to get them going on pages, or else that final ultimate deadline won't be met.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to talk about? Anything you want to promote or anything like that?
Nope. No, I mean, if people want to donate to the CLLDF, that's the kind of the Canadian chapter of the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. That's like Comic Legends Legal Defense Fund.
Yeah, and I'll post the link to that in the notes for this episode and on Twitter when I post it for sure.
Okay, yeah, awesome. Yeah, because they're the ones that you can donate to help out the Canadian shops, because the recent big kind of charity push for the BINC doesn't cover Canada. And
we need all shops to survive if possible.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah. Chip, thank you so much for like doing this again. And this was a great conversation. I had so much fun.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, my pleasure, Jesse.
Hey guys, this is Jesse coming back right in to promote the podcast social media links, talk about our Patreon, and give credit for the rest of the podcast. You can follow us on Comic Books Matter on Twitter at Comics Matter Pod, COMICSMATTERPOD. You can email us any questions, stories, or inquiries about interviews at comicbooksmatter@gmail.com. You can also do the same on our Twitter, but I also have the email now, and I wanted to showcase that. You can donate to our Patreon at patreon.com/comicbooksmatter. Don't feel like you need to donate. Only if you're financially able to and you really like the show and you want to see it grow. The logo for the show is done by my friend Steven. He's great. Nothing to promote still. Great guy still. Theme song is Joy in the Restaurant by David. I found it on freemusicarchive.com. Thanks for listening, guys, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.